Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. We're discussing the geopolitics of semiconductors and what India and US can do together and what possibly Taiwan can do as well. We still have with us Ajit, Manocha, President and CEO of Semiconductor Equipment and Materials, Paul Scharre, Vice President and Director of Studies at Center for New American Security, and Jeffrey Bean, Program Manager, Tech Policy at ORF America. Paul, if I could come with you, do you see certain points where the CHIPS Act and the semicon policy of India to promote semiconductor manufacturing can complement each other?
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. and India both have a shared interest in growing India's role in the semiconductor industry at a number of places, whether that's in fabrication, in making the chips, in design, in the advanced testing and packaging that comes to assemble the chips and put them together, and in the manufacturing of finished electronic devices, where right now China dominates the market supply chain for manufacturing these devices. And so a lot of electronics right now, they might be chips that are designed in the US, they're made in Taiwan, and then they're assembled in China. And China has an outsized role in the supply chains. And we've seen over the last couple of years how much that's a risk, how much being dependent on a country where you don't trust them, it's not clear if you have these vulnerabilities, how China might weaponize that. That's not in any of our countries' interests. So finding ways to work together to grow India's role in the semiconductor supply chain is vitally important, and it's certainly a priority for the United States.
Right. But Jeff, is it really worthwhile? Because the entire urgency around semiconductors came with COVID-19, when we suddenly realized that there was a surge in demand for electronics and we have fallen gravely short of semiconductors. But considering India does not have any ecosystem for semiconductors just yet, where can India complement United States plans for semiconductor manufacturing? And can India really play a big role in global manufacturing of semiconductors in the global value chain?
Thank you, Ajit. I think from an outsider's perspective, as an analyst, on the industry side, the challenge is that India faces competition from around the world. Everyone has a CHIPS Act, it seems, in place, of course, Europe, Korea, the United States as well. But India does have some advantages, as Paul mentioned. First off, it's in U.S. government interest to ensure that there is resiliency and redundancy among like-minded partners and allies in the supply chain. In addition to that, it's worth noting that India has a significant advantage with respect to design talent. Most of the major fabless companies, that is, companies that design chips but don't manufacture them, have offices in India and Bangalore and other locations to facilitate and draw on the talent that exists with respect to chip design. It is true that if you're looking at the efforts of the India Semiconductor Mission in their effort to move India up the value chain, I think it's clear that the center and certain states are very serious this time around about trying to draw advanced manufacturing capability for semiconductors into India. But there are challenges, and just globally around the world, as private sector firms are the ones that take these decisions. It's a highly capitally intensive industry with billions of dollars required to set up a fab or a back-end facility. And these companies have to take hard decisions and look at, do you have stable electricity supplies? Is there access to clean water and redundancy in both of these areas? What does the taxation regime look like? What is the regulatory environment like? Are there clusters of universities training electrical engineers and material scientists, as well as other related companies? These things take a great deal of time to set up. So I think for India, the key is going to be to secure the first mover and try and establish one or two of these clusters. But it's a long process.
It's a long process. Ajit, Manocha, coming to you, India and United States have signed a memorandum of understanding on semiconductors during Gina Raimondo's recent visit. Very little is known about how this will really work out. Do we know the nitty-gritties of this MOU?
Not really. We don't know the nitty-gritties, but I think the big picture is very clear. I think my colleagues Paul and Jeffrey have articulated the role India can play and India should play. And I think SEMI brings yet another dimension. SEMI is a 50-some years old India trade association where we bring the ecosystem into the countries who need to grow. And we enable the ecosystem. And I think my recent discussions with the government of India, especially with the Honorable Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw and Rajiv Chandrasekharji, we have outlined how SEMI can play a role to bring the ecosystem into India. Like we have various events held by SEMI in like-minded countries like Japan, South Korea, Europe, U.S., of course. And we are planning on bringing a similar kind of semicon conference into India in 24. And that will actually bring the entire ecosystem for networking and for also supporting India's new projects. As Jeffrey mentioned, that we need to see the first one, a couple of new companies to come in. And we need to play a role to support them to make sure they're very successful and first time right. So I think that's the role where SEMI will play, and we'll make this a success. Whatever the MOU contents are, well, I think we're going to build upon that. And I think the Assistant Secretary said that the details are being worked out. And I'm pretty sure that in the coming weeks, we'll be involved in those planning discussions with Department of Commerce and the Indian government.
Right. I would also like to ask you, since the Indian government announced a semicon policy, we've not seen too much really taking off the ground when it comes to actual work on the ground. Yes, a few companies have signed joint ventures, announced plans, but we've not really seen things moving as such as far as actual groundwork goes, Mr. Manocha. Do you think India needs to do more? Are investors right now a little wary, little hesitant about the India semiconductor story, Mr. Manocha?
Well, I would say one thing, that in the past there were some missed opportunities where India announced the fabs and didn't happen. But I think this policy, for the first time, I feel this policy is very well thought of. It underpins the various comments and inputs I have been giving, and I think India has been receiving from other semiconductor veterans as well. I'm very pleased with the progress that's going on under the India Semiconductor Mission. I am under NDA, so I cannot really reveal any of the details, but the couple of applicants which we are in the final stages of reviewing, I think I am very pleased with the business plan. Looks very convincing and compelling. And again, the next question will be how to make it implemented. Of course, before that, Government of India has to do its own due diligence to make sure that they qualify in all other issues that they have to deal with, especially the recent news about some of the financial issues with some of the companies. So, but as far as business plan is concerned, I'm feeling very, very, very pleased with the what I've seen so far. And the next question will be execution plan or implementation plan. Here we'll need a lot of involvement of the Government of India to make sure that we can bring the right kind of support from outside India to make it a success.
Right. Paul, coming back to you, Taiwan, I think a question that Taiwan is asking, what will be Taiwan's role when it comes to U.S. global alliances on semiconductors, including the alliance with India for that matter? Do you think, from your conversations, your understanding of the U.S. government, do they have a role for Taiwan? Will Taiwan have a role to play between U.S. and India when it comes to that MOU?
Well, Taiwan, I think, is under any scenario going to continue to be the leading hub of semiconductor manufacturing, particularly for the most leading edge chips. And that's not going to change. The lead that TSMC has over other companies is remarkable. Really, other than Samsung in Korea, there's really no other companies that are competing up at the leading edge. And so I don't think that's going to change. We've begun to see TSMC look to diversify some of its manufacturing. They're placing a close to leading edge fab in the United States. So that's, I think, an important consideration. And they are playing a very active role, both the company and the Taiwanese government, in working with other countries, the United States, Japan, the Netherlands, others, including, I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to work with India as we think about diversifying supply chains, creating more resiliency. But I don't think there's any scenario in which Taiwan doesn't continue to be a really important focal point for leading edge semiconductor manufacturing in the future.
Right. Jeffrey, we've run out of time, but very briefly, can Taiwan play a role in helping India skill its workforce when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing?
Yeah, I agree with Paul. There's not going to be a scenario where Taiwan isn't at the forefront of the semiconductor ecosystem. With respect to the plans that India has put forward, I think there is a potential role for collaboration and training. Of course, my understanding is of the bids that have been publicly discussed, Vedanta, Foxconn. Of course, Foxconn is a Taiwanese and Chinese company, but doesn't have a great deal of semiconductor expertise. So the challenge will be, I think, for all of these bids, can they attract a leading semiconductor firm that has real expertise and know-how in manufacturing? On the training side, I think there are opportunities for collaboration between TechRo and other entities within India on the island. And of course, Taiwan has all the things that we just discussed in terms of clustering effect, in terms of science parks and the know-how, the infrastructure in place. So that expertise is something that I think the government is willing to share with like-minded partners and allies.
All right, we've run out of time, but Jeffrey Bean, Paul Scharre, and Ajit Manocha, thank you very much for joining us here on Global Eye, giving us your view on India-U.S. Collaboration on semiconductors and U.S. attempts to form alliances on chips to really have strong supply chains. That's all we have time for on Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.